My boyfriend hid his ex's things in our closet, just in case she comes back. I'd been living with Jason for 4 months when I found the first box. I was looking for winter boots in our closet and found this sealed container labeled Taxes 2019, pushed far in the back corner. But when I moved it, something inside clinked like glass. I opened it and found perfume bottles, jewelry, a hairbrush with blonde hair still in it, and about 30 photos of Jason with some woman. When I confronted him, he said, "Oh, that's just Megan's stuff. She left it when she moved out. I keep meaning to throw it away but haven't gotten around to it." I asked why he kept it in a box labeled Taxes, and he said he didn't want to see it every day because it made him sad. Fine, whatever. People process breakups differently. But then I started finding more stuff. There was another box labeled Christmas decorations that was full of her clothes. Not just random clothes, but carefully folded dresses and sweaters with tissue paper between them like they were being preserved. When I asked about it, Jason said Megan might want them back someday and he didn't want them to get wrinkled. They'd been broken up for over a year. Why would she come back for clothes after a year? He said you never know what people might need and he was just being considerate. The bathroom cabinet had a drawer I'd never opened because Jason said it was broken. It wasn't broken. It was full of her skincare products, all arranged perfectly with the labels facing forward. Her toothbrush was still there in its holder. Her birth control pills with her name on them. Pills that had been refilled 2 months ago, which meant he was somehow getting her prescriptions refilled. When I demanded an explanation, he said he kept them, just in case she has a medical emergency and needs them. He claimed he was being responsible and helpful. I told him to throw everything away immediately. He said he would, but instead, he just moved it all. I found the boxes in his car trunk a week later. He said he was taking them to donate, but hadn't found time. Then they were in his office, then the garage, then back in the closet, but behind his suits. Each time with some excuse about meaning to get rid of them, but forgetting or not having time, or waiting for the right donation center that would appreciate nice things. 6 months into living together, I discovered the real situation. Jason had been texting Megan the whole time, telling her he was keeping her space ready for when she was done with her phase. He called our relationship a phase to his ex. He told her I was just a roommate helping with rent. He sent her photos of her things to prove he was keeping them safe. He'd been telling her that her pink toothbrush was still in the same spot, waiting for her. Megan, it turned out, had no idea about any of this. She was engaged to someone else and living in a different state. She'd been ignoring his texts for months and had blocked him on everything except one old email account she rarely checked. The climax came when Jason decided to take action. He invited Megan to come get her things, saying it was urgent because I was threatening to throw them away. He told her I was some crazy roommate who was jealous of their past relationship. Megan, being a normal person, forwarded the emails to me through mutual friends because she was worried about my safety living with someone so delusional. She included screenshots of 2 years' worth of emails where Jason described their future together, their wedding plans, the children they'd have when she came back. She had responded maybe 3 times in 2 years, each time telling him to stop contacting her and that she'd left those things behind on purpose because she didn't want reminders of him. Armed with this information, I arranged the greatest reveal of my life. I told Jason I was going away for the weekend to visit my sister. Instead, I stayed at a friend's place and watched through our doorbell camera. Jason immediately started pulling all of Megan's things out of hiding. He arranged her clothes on the bed. He put her perfume back on the dresser. He placed her photos around the apartment. He set up her skincare routine in the bathroom exactly how he claimed she used to have it. He was recreating her presence in our home. Then I came back with Megan's actual fiancé, Tom, who she'd asked to help me deal with this situation. We walked in to find Jason had lit candles and was cooking Megan's supposed favorite meal, with 2 place settings at the table. He'd bought fresh flowers and put them in a vase with a card that said, "Welcome home." The apartment looked like a shrine. Jason's face when he saw us instead of Megan was pure confusion. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Tom and I stood frozen in the doorway while Jason stared at us like we were strangers who'd wandered into the wrong apartment. His eyes kept moving past Tom's shoulder, craning his neck to see into the hallway behind us. He was actually looking for Megan, expecting her to appear any second. The candles flickered on the table where 2 place settings waited, and the smell of whatever he'd cooked filled the whole apartment. Jason's mouth opened and closed a few times before any words came out. He looked at Tom, then at me, then back at the empty hallway. His hands were still holding the dish towel he'd been using, and he twisted it between his fingers. The confusion on his face was so real, so genuine, that for a second I almost felt bad for him. Then I remembered the years of emails, the lies, the shrine he'd built in our home. Jason finally found his voice and asked where Megan was. He looked directly at Tom and asked why he'd brought me back early from my sister's house. His tone was puzzled, almost annoyed, like we were the ones acting weird. He gestured at the apartment, at the candles and flowers, and said he'd been expecting Megan. He actually said those words out loud, like it was normal to set up a romantic dinner for your ex while your girlfriend was supposedly out of town. Tom stepped forward and his voice came out firm and clear. He told Jason that Megan was never coming back. He said Megan had been engaged to him for 8 months. He explained that Megan forwarded all of Jason's disturbing emails because she was worried about my safety. Jason's face went completely white. His eyes got wide and he took a step backward, bumping into the kitchen counter. The dish towel fell from his hands onto the floor. He stared at Tom like Tom had just told him the sky was green. I could see him trying to process the information, his brain working to make sense of something that didn't fit his version of reality. He kept shaking his head in these tiny movements. I found my voice then, and it came out stronger than I expected. I told Jason I knew everything. I said I knew about the years of emails where he described their future wedding and the names he'd picked for their kids. I told him I knew he'd been calling me just a roommate to Megan, that he'd lied about our entire relationship. I pointed at the apartment around us, at her clothes on the bed visible through the bedroom door, at her photos on the walls. I said I knew about the shrine he'd been maintaining in our shared home. Jason started stammering immediately. His words came out jumbled and he kept stopping and starting. He said I was misunderstanding his intentions. He claimed I was taking things out of context. He insisted he could explain everything if I'd just listen. His hands moved around in the air like he was trying to grab onto something solid. He said he was just being a good person by keeping Megan's things safe. His voice got louder and he repeated that he never meant any harm. Then he turned on Tom and said Tom had clearly poisoned Megan against him. He actually believed what he was saying. I could see it in his eyes. He genuinely thought he'd been doing something kind and thoughtful. The delusion was so complete that he couldn't see how wrong any of this was. Tom pulled out his phone without saying anything. He scrolled for a second and then started reading Jason's emails out loud. His voice was calm and steady as he read about wedding venues Jason had researched. He read the children's names Jason had picked out, 3 kids with specific names and ages he'd planned. He read Jason's descriptions of the house they'd buy and the life they'd build when Megan came back. Every word Tom read made Jason shrink a little more. His shoulders hunched forward and his face got even paler. Hearing his own words reflected back at him seemed to crack something. I told Jason I was leaving immediately. I said I'd come back tomorrow with my sister to get my belongings. The words felt powerful coming out of my mouth. Jason's whole body jerked like I'd hit him. He started begging me to stay so we could talk this through. His voice went high and desperate. He moved toward me with his hand reaching out for my arm. Tom stepped between us before Jason could touch me. Tom didn't say anything, just put his body in the way. Jason stopped moving but kept talking, pleading, making promises about how he'd get rid of everything, and we could start fresh. We turned and walked out while Jason was still talking. I heard him calling after us as we went down the hallway. Tom's hand stayed on my back, guiding me forward. We got to his car and he opened the passenger door for me. My legs felt shaky getting in. Tom drove away from the apartment building and I watched it disappear in the side mirror. My whole body started shaking then. The adrenaline that had kept me calm during the confrontation hit all at once. My hands trembled in my lap, and my breathing got fast and shallow. Tom didn't try to talk to me, just drove steadily through the streets toward Valerie's house. The drive took maybe 15 minutes, but it felt longer. Every red light made me worry Jason would somehow follow us. I kept checking the mirrors even though I knew that was silly. We pulled up to Valerie's place and she must have been watching for us because she opened the door before we even got to the porch. Valerie wrapped her arms around me tight the second I got close enough. She didn't ask any questions, just held me while I shook. She guided me inside and showed me to her guest room. The bed already had fresh sheets and there were clean towels folded on the dresser. She'd set everything up before I even arrived. Valerie went to make tea while Tom and I sat in her living room. He pulled out his phone and called Megan on video. She answered right away and her face filled the screen. Megan started apologizing immediately. Her words tumbled out fast, saying she was so sorry for not warning me sooner about Jason's behavior. She explained that she'd thought blocking him everywhere except that one old email account would make him stop. She said she checked that email maybe once every few months and never imagined he was still so obsessed. Megan's voice cracked when she said she never thought he'd trap another woman in his fantasy the way he'd trapped me. I thanked Megan and ended the call, then sat on Valerie's couch staring at my hands. Tom left after making sure I had his number in case Jason showed up. Valerie made up the guest bed and handed me pajamas, but I knew sleep wasn't coming. I lay there in the dark replaying every moment from the past 6 months. The time Jason said he was working late but was probably arranging Megan's perfume bottles. The weekend he claimed to visit his parents but maybe drove past Megan's old apartment. Every distracted conversation where he was mentally writing another email to her. I felt so stupid for not seeing it sooner. The signs were everywhere and I'd explained them all away because I wanted to believe his excuses. I finally dozed off around 5 in the morning. Valerie knocked on the door at 8 with coffee and sat cross-legged on the bed. She pulled out a notebook and started making lists without asking if I was ready. First list was my belongings at the apartment. Second list was lease obligations and how to break them. Third list was safety concerns if Jason became unstable. Fourth list was finding a therapist who took my insurance. She wrote everything in neat columns while I drank coffee and felt grateful for her practical approach. No crying or hugging, just problem solving. She called her boss and took a personal day, then started Googling landlord-tenant laws for our state. My sister Alana called at 9 and said she was already on the road. She'd left her house at 5 in the morning when I texted her last night about what happened. 4 hours of driving to help me move out. I heard her car pull up around 1 in the afternoon. Tom met us at the apartment complex at 2 because Valerie insisted I needed backup in case Jason was there. The apartment door was unlocked when we arrived. Inside, we found a note on the kitchen counter in Jason's handwriting, saying he was staying with his parents for a few days to give me space. The note felt like another manipulation, like he was being the reasonable one. Alana started in the bedroom while Tom stood guard by the door. I opened the closet and saw the empty corner where the first box had been hidden. The fake tax container that started everything. I pulled clothes off hangers and noticed the gap behind Jason's suits where boxes kept reappearing after I asked him to throw them out. The bathroom drawer that wasn't actually broken sat open, still holding Megan's skincare products with labels facing forward. Everything felt contaminated now. Every surface held evidence of his obsession. I knelt down to check under the bed for any belongings I might have stored there. My hand hit something solid pushed far back on Jason's side. I dragged out a white box I'd never seen before. The lid came off easily. Inside was a wedding dress, carefully folded in tissue paper, tags still attached. Size 6, Megan's size based on the clothes I'd found. The receipt sat on top, dated 3 months ago. He'd bought a wedding dress for his ex while living with me, while sleeping next to me every night. I called Alana over and she stared at it for a long moment. Alana pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. She photographed the wedding dress from multiple angles, the receipt, the preserved clothes still hanging in the closet. She walked through the apartment documenting everything. The shrine setup Jason had created with candles and flowers, the 2-place settings still on the table, the card that said "Welcome Home" in his handwriting. She took photos of the bathroom products, the photos of Megan arranged on the dresser, every single piece of evidence. She said we needed documentation in case Jason tried to tell mutual friends a different story, or if his behavior escalated and I needed a restraining order. We packed my essentials in 3 hours. Clothes, laptop, important documents, some books. I left behind anything we'd bought together or that felt tainted by the situation. The couch where he'd sat writing emails to Megan, the bed where he'd hidden a wedding dress underneath, the kitchen table where he'd planned a romantic dinner for someone else. Alana carried the last box to her car while I stood in the kitchen. I put my apartment key on the counter next to the welcome home card Jason had written. The card sat there like evidence of how far he'd separated from reality. I took a photo of the key and card together. One final piece of documentation. Tom drove behind us back to Valerie's house in case Jason tried to follow. Valerie had soup ready when we arrived, but I couldn't eat. I pulled out my phone and called the landlord instead. She answered on the 3rd ring. I explained I needed to break the lease due to unsafe living conditions. She asked what happened, and I gave her the basic facts without going into detail. My boyfriend had been secretly maintaining a shrine to his ex while lying about our relationship status. The landlord went quiet for a moment, then said she'd work with me on minimizing penalties. She'd need everything in writing, but she understood the situation. My phone started buzzing with texts while I was still talking to the landlord. Jason's name appeared on the screen over and over. I finished the call and opened the messages. Dozens of them. Sent rapid fire over the past 10 minutes. Apologies for not being honest sooner. Explanations about how he knew it looked bad, but I was misunderstanding. Promises to get professional help if I'd just give him another chance. Increasingly desperate pleas saying he couldn't lose me too. I showed the text to Tom and he said to maintain complete no contact. Don't respond to anything. Responding would just encourage Jason to keep trying. Valerie sat next to me on the couch and pulled up her insurance website. She'd gone through a bad breakup 2 years ago and found a therapist who really helped. She checked if the same therapist was still in network. The therapist's name was Dr. Lisa Anderson, and she had availability later this week. Valerie handed me the phone and I called the office. The receptionist asked basic questions about insurance and availability. I got an appointment for Thursday at 4 in the afternoon, 3 days away. The receptionist asked if this was for an existing issue or a new situation. I said new situation, and she marked it as urgent. Hanging up felt like the first positive step forward in days. The next evening, my phone rang with a number I recognized. Travis. I almost didn't answer because I was exhausted from everything, but I picked up on the 4th ring. He started talking fast, saying Jason had called him claiming I'd abandoned him without any explanation or warning. Travis sounded confused and a little annoyed, like he was trying to figure out what actually happened. I didn't say much at first, just opened my phone and started scrolling through the photos Alana had taken. The shrine set up with candles everywhere. The 2-place settings at the dinner table. The card that said "Welcome Home" in Jason's handwriting. The bathroom products all arranged with labels facing forward. I sent them to Travis one by one while he was still on the phone. I heard him go quiet as the photos came through. The silence stretched out for maybe 30 seconds, which felt really long. Then Travis said he was so sorry, that he had no idea Jason was like this when he introduced us at that party last year. His voice sounded different, kind of shocked and guilty at the same time. I told him it wasn't his fault because nobody could have known. We hung up after that and I felt weird about the whole conversation, like one more piece of my normal life had shifted. 2 days later, the landlord called back. I was helping Valerie fold laundry when my phone buzzed and I saw her number on the screen. My stomach dropped because I figured she was calling about penalties or fees for breaking the lease early. But when I answered, she said she'd reviewed everything I told her, and she was letting me out with no penalty at all. She said Jason's behavior created what she called an uninhabitable environment, which was apparently a legal term. Then she told me something I didn't expect. She was requiring Jason to move out within 30 days because of the disturbing nature of what I'd described. She said she couldn't have someone living in her property who might make other tenants uncomfortable or unsafe. I thanked her about 5 times, and she said she wished me well before hanging up. Valerie looked at me when I put the phone down and I told her what happened. She actually cheered and hugged me, saying this was the best possible outcome for the lease situation. The relief lasted about an hour before my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but it had the same area code as Jason's parents. I stared at the screen trying to decide whether to answer. Curiosity won, and I picked up. A woman's voice said my name and then immediately started apologizing. It was Jason's mother. She was crying while she talked, her words coming out choppy and broken up. She said they had no idea Jason was still obsessed with Megan, that they honestly thought he'd moved on when he started dating me 6 months ago. She kept saying she was so sorry, that if she'd known she would have warned me or done something. I sat down on Valerie's couch because my legs felt shaky. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened while she cried and apologized some more. Then Jason's mother started explaining things I hadn't known before. She said when Megan left him almost 2 years ago, Jason had a complete breakdown. He barely got out of bed for 3 months. He stopped going to work and almost lost his job. His parents had to come stay with him because they were worried he might hurt himself. They got him into therapy for a while and he seemed to get better, started functioning again and going back to work. When he told them about me, they were so relieved because they thought it meant he'd finally processed the breakup and moved forward. Now she realized he never actually dealt with losing Megan. He just created this whole fantasy world where she was coming back and built his life around that instead. Her voice cracked when she said this part, and I could hear how devastated she was to understand what had really been happening. I took a breath and told Jason's mother I appreciated her calling and apologizing, but I also said I couldn't help Jason through this situation. He needed professional mental health treatment, not another girlfriend trying to fix him or support him through it. I said this as gently as I could because she was clearly upset, but I needed to be clear about my boundaries. She agreed right away, saying she understood completely and didn't expect me to help. She said they were trying to get Jason into therapy again, but he was resisting, claiming he didn't need it. We talked for a few more minutes and then said goodbye. After I hung up, I felt drained, like that conversation had used up energy I didn't have. Thursday afternoon arrived and I drove to my first therapy appointment. The office was in a medical building near downtown with bland beige walls and generic art. I filled out paperwork in the waiting room, my hand shaking a little while I wrote. When the therapist called my name, I followed her back to a small office with 2 chairs and a box of tissues on the side table. She introduced herself and asked what brought me in. I started explaining about Jason and the boxes and Megan and the shrine, and about halfway through I started crying. Not just a few tears, but full crying where I couldn't really talk clearly. I grabbed tissues from the box and kept going, telling her everything that had happened over the past week. She listened without interrupting, and when I finally finished, she said something that made me feel better. She said what Jason did was a serious violation of trust, and that my feelings of betrayal and stupidity were completely normal reactions. She said I wasn't stupid for not seeing it sooner because people like Jason are skilled at hiding their real behavior and making their partners doubt their own instincts. The validation felt important somehow, like someone with training was confirming that my reactions made sense. We spent the rest of the hour talking about next steps and coping strategies. When I left, I felt lighter than I had in days. That weekend, Valerie helped me start apartment hunting online. We sat at her kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through rental listings in my price range. Most of them looked depressing or were in bad neighborhoods, and I felt overwhelmed looking at how much rent cost for a 1-bedroom. Valerie kept pointing out good things about different places, trying to stay positive. We made a list of apartments to visit next week and scheduled some tours. The whole process felt exhausting because I was basically restarting my entire life. But it also felt kind of powerful to know that my next home would be completely mine, with no hidden boxes or secret shrines or lies about who I was. Just my own space that I controlled. On Monday morning, I woke up to an email from Jason. The subject line said, "I'm sorry," and I almost deleted it without reading. But something made me open it instead. The email was long, maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs, and he said he realized now that his feelings for Megan were unhealthy. He said he wanted to work on himself and get proper help. He said he hoped someday I could forgive him for lying and for what he put me through. The whole thing had this tone like he was in a recovery program or something. Very formal and apologetic. I read it twice and then saved it to a folder without responding. Part of me wanted to write back and tell him exactly what I thought, but I remembered Tom's advice about no contact. Responding would just open a door I needed to keep closed. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang and Megan's name showed up on the screen. I answered, and she asked how I was doing in this really genuine way that made me tear up a little. We ended up talking for over an hour about Jason and his behavior patterns. She told me things I hadn't known about the end of their relationship. How he became really controlling and couldn't accept when she wanted space or time with friends. How he would show up places she'd mentioned going, claiming it was a coincidence. How he started planning their future out loud, talking about weddings and kids and houses. even though she'd never agreed to any of it. She said when she finally broke up with him, he acted like she was just confused and would change her mind soon. Hearing all this made me feel less alone somehow, like I wasn't the only person who dealt with his disconnection from reality. Near the end of the call, Megan told me she finally blocked that last email account after seeing how Jason used it to trap me in this situation. She said she felt guilty for not blocking it sooner, that maybe if she had, then he wouldn't have been able to maintain his fantasy as long. I told her that Jason's actions weren't her responsibility, and she shouldn't blame herself for his choices. She'd told him to stop contacting her multiple times, and he ignored that. The guilt was his to carry, not hers. She thanked me for saying that, and we promised to stay in touch. After we hung up, I felt grateful that something good had come from this mess, that I'd connected with someone who really understood what I'd been through. The next day, Valerie and I spent hours scrolling through apartment listings on her laptop. Most places in my budget looked depressing, with dark rooms and weird stains in the photos, or they were in neighborhoods where I'd heard too many police sirens. I kept getting discouraged because rent for a one-bedroom cost way more than what I'd been paying for half of Jason's place. Valerie stayed positive, though, and kept pointing out good things about different apartments. We made a list of 5 places to visit and scheduled tours for the following week. That Thursday afternoon, I toured the first 3 apartments on my list, and they were all worse in person than in the photos. The first one smelled like cigarettes, even though it claimed to be smoke-free. The second had a bathroom, so tiny I could barely turn around. The third had neighbors who were screaming at each other through the walls during my tour. I felt exhausted and ready to give up when Valerie convinced me to see the last 2 places on Friday. The 4th apartment was okay, but nothing special, and I couldn't picture myself living there. Then I walked into the 5th place and something clicked. It was a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building with actual security cameras and a locked entry door. The apartment had big windows that let in tons of natural light, and the bedroom had a decent-sized closet with no weird boxes hidden in the back. The kitchen was small but clean with new appliances, and the bathroom had been recently updated. Best of all, it was only 4 blocks from Valerie's neighborhood, which meant I'd be close to my best friend. The rent was $200 more per month than my half of the old place, but I ran the numbers on my phone and my budget could handle it if I was careful about eating out and entertainment. I told the property manager I wanted to apply right away, and she gave me the paperwork to fill out. I called Alana on my way back to Valerie's house and told her about the apartment. She got excited and said she'd help me with the application process, since she'd just gone through it herself 6 months ago. That weekend, Alana drove over and we spent Saturday afternoon filling out all the forms together. She helped me gather pay stubs and references and write a cover letter explaining my situation without going into too much detail about Jason's weirdness. We submitted everything online Saturday evening, and the property manager emailed back saying she'd review it within a few days. I tried not to get my hopes up too much, but I kept thinking about those big windows and the secure building. Monday morning, I woke up to an email saying my application had been approved. I actually yelled out loud in Valerie's guest room, and she came running to see what was wrong. When I showed her the approval email, she hugged me and said we needed to celebrate. My move-in date was set for 2 weeks away, which gave me time to buy furniture and all the basic stuff I'd need since I'd left most of the shared items at Jason's place. That afternoon, my phone started buzzing with texts from Travis and 2 other mutual friends. Travis wrote that he'd heard the full story about Jason from some people in our friend group, and he wanted to check if I was okay. He said he'd always thought Jason seemed a bit strange, but couldn't figure out exactly why. The other friends sent similar messages saying they'd noticed odd things about Jason, but didn't want to overstep by saying anything. Reading their texts made me feel less stupid for missing the warning signs. If other people noticed something was off but couldn't pinpoint it either, then maybe I wasn't completely blind. I texted everyone back thanking them for reaching out and told them I was doing better now that I had my own place lined up. Wednesday afternoon, I had my second therapy appointment. The therapist asked how I was handling everything, and I told her about finding the apartment and getting support from friends. Then we talked about how I could rebuild my ability to trust my own judgment after Jason spent months making me doubt my instincts. She explained that people like Jason are really skilled at making their targets question reality. She said the fact that I recognized the manipulation and got out showed strength, not weakness. That made me feel better about the whole situation. She gave me some exercises to practice trusting my gut feelings about small, everyday decisions to rebuild that confidence. Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. My stomach dropped when I saw his name, but I made myself read it. The message said he was moving back to his hometown to be closer to his parents and get intensive therapy. He wrote that he wasn't asking for forgiveness, but wanted me to know he was getting help. The whole text had this formal tone like he was reading from a script his therapist gave him. I stared at it for a minute, then blocked his number without responding. Tom had told me no contact was the best approach, and I trusted that advice. That weekend, Valerie and Alana took me shopping for furniture and stuff for the new apartment. We hit up 3 different furniture stores and a home goods place. I picked out a bed frame and mattress that I actually liked instead of whatever Jason would have wanted. I chose a couch in this deep blue color that made me happy just looking at it. We found kitchen supplies and bathroom stuff and decorations that were completely my style. It felt weird but amazing to make every single choice based only on what I wanted. Alana kept joking that this was my chance to have the apartment I'd always dreamed about. By Sunday evening, Valerie's car was packed with bags of supplies, and we'd arranged delivery for the bigger furniture pieces. Tuesday afternoon, the landlord from the old apartment called. She said Jason had moved out early and left the place surprisingly clean. She was keeping his security deposit to cover breaking his lease early. Then she asked if I wanted any of the furniture he'd abandoned. I thought about it for a minute and decided to go back one last time to grab a few things that were actually mine. I called Tom and asked if he'd come with me for safety, even though Jason was supposedly gone. Tom agreed and met me at the old apartment Thursday morning. Walking back in felt surreal after everything that had happened. Jason really had cleaned the place and taken all of Megan's shrine stuff with him. I grabbed the coffee maker I'd bought with my own money and some kitchen supplies that were mine. I took a bookshelf that I'd owned before moving in with Jason. Everything else felt contaminated by his lies and delusions, so I left it behind. Tom helped me load everything into my car, and we were out of there in 20 minutes. The following Monday was move-in day, and I'd never been more excited. Valerie showed up at 8 in the morning with coffee. Alana arrived 30 minutes later with bagels. Then Travis came with 2 other friends from our group. The furniture delivery truck showed up right on schedule, and we all worked together getting everything inside and set up. Travis and one friend assembled the bed frame while Alana and I unpacked kitchen boxes. Valerie directed furniture placement like she was on one of those home design shows. By noon, everything was in place and the apartment actually looked like a real home. My friend surprised me with a housewarming gift basket full of nice coffee and snacks, and a bottle of wine with a card that said congratulations on my new beginning. We ordered pizza and sat on my new couch eating and laughing. Everyone left around 4, and I was finally alone in my own space. That first night, I made tea in my new kitchen and sat by the big windows watching the street below. When I went to bed, I realized I felt completely relaxed for the first time in weeks. The apartment was totally mine with no hidden boxes in the closets and no shrine to someone else lurking in the corners. There were no secrets waiting to jump out and no lies hiding behind fake tax labels. I fell asleep faster than I had since the whole situation started and didn't wake up once during the night. The next week, I had my 3rd therapy session, and we spent the whole hour talking about why I stayed. So long, even when things felt wrong. The therapist asked me to list all the red flags I'd noticed before finding out about the emails and texts. I counted them off on my fingers while she wrote notes. The boxes labeled as taxes and Christmas decorations, but full of someone else's stuff. The perfectly folded clothes with tissue paper like they were being saved in a museum. The bathroom drawer he said was broken but wasn't. The prescriptions being refilled for someone who didn't live there anymore. Each time I found something weird, Jason had an explanation that sounded almost reasonable in the moment. The therapist explained that manipulative people are really good at making you doubt what you're seeing with your own eyes. They give explanations that sound caring or logical, so you feel bad for questioning them. She said recognizing that pattern now would help me spot it faster if I ever encountered it again. We practiced what I should have said or done differently, not to make me feel guilty, but to build better instincts for next time. By the end of the session, I felt less stupid about the whole situation, and more aware of how Jason's explanations were designed to confuse me. 2 days later, a package arrived at my apartment with Megan's return address on it. Inside was a funny card with a cat wearing sunglasses that said something about being too cool for drama. She'd included 3 different kinds of nice tea, the fancy loose-leaf stuff in tins, and a book about recovering from relationships with manipulative people. Her handwritten note said she was really glad I got out faster than she did, because she wasted 2 full years trying to make things work with Jason. She wrote that she was here if I ever needed to talk or just vent about the whole weird situation. She also said Tom told her I seemed like a strong person, and she was sorry we had to meet under such strange circumstances. I made myself a cup of the tea that afternoon, and it felt good knowing Megan understood exactly what I'd been through. The following week, I started saying yes to things again instead of making excuses to stay home. My coworkers had been inviting me to happy hour every Thursday for months, but I always said I was tired or had other plans. Really, I'd been going home to deal with Jason's mood swings and the constant tension of living with someone who was secretly in love with someone else. That Thursday, I showed up at the bar where everyone gathered after work, and it felt amazing to just relax and laugh without worrying about what I'd find hidden in my apartment later. One of my coworkers named Sarah commented that I seemed way more relaxed than I had in months. Another person said I was smiling more and seemed like myself again. I hadn't realized how much Jason's situation had been affecting me at work until people started pointing out the difference. The next Tuesday, Travis called and said his girlfriend's roommate had just gone through something similar with an ex who wouldn't let go of their relationship. He thought we might want to meet up and talk, since we'd both dealt with the specific weirdness of someone being obsessed with a past relationship. We met for coffee on Saturday morning at this place near my new apartment. Her name was Sophie, and she'd dated a guy who kept showing up at her job and her gym claiming he just wanted to be friends. But really, he was trying to stay in her life until she came back to him. We swapped stories for over an hour about the bizarre things our exes had done and the excuses they'd made for their behavior. It helped so much to talk with someone who truly got it, someone who didn't just say that sounds crazy, but actually understood the day-to-day reality of living with that kind of delusion. Sophie gave me her number and said to text her anytime if I needed to vent or just wanted to grab coffee again. On Monday, a letter came from my old landlord with a check for my full security deposit inside. She'd written a note saying she was really sorry I went through that situation in one of her properties. She mentioned she was going to start doing more thorough background checks and reference calls for future tenants after this incident. She said she felt partly responsible for not catching Jason's issues earlier, and she hoped I was doing okay now. The check was for the full amount with no deductions, which surprised me since I'd left early. I deposited it right away and put the money toward furniture I still needed for my new place. About 2 months after the whole confrontation with Jason, I was getting ready for work one morning when I realized something weird. I'd gone 3 full days without thinking about Jason or the situation at all. Not once had I replayed the confrontation scene or wondered what he was doing now or felt angry about the lies. It was such a small thing, but it felt huge in terms of my recovery process. I texted Valerie about it, and she sent back a bunch of celebration emojis saying that was a major milestone. That same week, Valerie suggested we start having dinner at my place every Monday night, taking turns cooking and just catching up on life without any crisis to deal with. Our first Monday dinner, I made pasta, and we sat at my little kitchen table eating and talking about normal stuff, like her job drama and a vacation she was planning. She told me she was really proud of how I'd handled everything and rebuilt my independence so quickly. She said a lot of people would have stayed stuck in that situation way longer or fallen apart afterward, but I just kept moving forward. I didn't feel particularly strong most days, but hearing her say it made me realize I had actually gotten through something pretty difficult. The next week at work, my boss called me into her office, and I got nervous thinking I'd messed something up. Instead, she told me I was getting a promotion to senior analyst with a decent pay raise. She said my work over the past few months had been exceptional, and she'd noticed how focused and productive I'd become. I thanked her and accepted right away, then realized later that I had so much more mental energy now that I wasn't constantly confused and anxious at home. Living with Jason had taken up so much space in my brain that I hadn't been able to focus properly on my job or anything else. During my next therapy session, we talked about whether I was ready to start dating again. The therapist asked how I felt about the idea, and I said I wasn't quite there yet, but I also wasn't totally opposed to it eventually. I wanted to be fully comfortable being alone first, before adding someone new to my life. She said that was a really healthy approach, and that there was no rush to jump into anything before I was ready. We talked about what green flags I should look for in future relationships, and what red flags I needed to watch out for, based on what I'd learned from Jason. The weekend after that, Alana drove up to visit and help me finish decorating my apartment. She brought a bunch of framed photos of our family and our friends that she'd printed out special. We spent Saturday afternoon hanging pictures on the walls and arranging them until the whole place felt warm and full of real relationships instead of the fake shrine Jason had maintained for Megan. Alana stepped back to look at everything we'd hung up and joked that my apartment had better energy than anywhere she'd ever visited. She said the whole place felt like me in a way the old apartment with Jason never had. We ordered takeout that night and watched movies on my couch, and I felt completely content with exactly where my life was at that moment. The next week, I was grabbing groceries at the store near my apartment when I ran into someone from Jason's friend group in the produce section. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, then walked over and said he wanted to apologize for not seeing what was happening. He told me Jason had moved back to his hometown and was apparently doing better in therapy, according to mutual friends. I thanked him for telling me and kept picking out apples, and I realized I felt absolutely nothing hearing about Jason. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even curiosity about his progress. Just complete neutral indifference, like he was a stranger I'd never known. The guy seemed relieved I wasn't upset and said he was glad I was doing okay. Then we both went back to our shopping. 3 months after the confrontation, Valerie's boyfriend mentioned he knew someone from his gym who might be good for me to meet. I was hesitant but agreed to a casual coffee date on a Saturday afternoon. The guy showed up on time at the coffee shop, and we talked for about an hour about work and hobbies and favorite restaurants in the city. It went well enough that I agreed to a second date, though I told him right away I needed to take things very slowly. He nodded and said he understood completely, that there was no pressure and we could just see how things went. His respectful response to my boundary actually made me more interested in seeing him again. My therapy sessions around this time started shifting away from processing the Jason situation toward bigger personal growth topics. The therapist asked me what patterns I wanted to work on changing, and I said I needed to get better at recognizing my own needs earlier, instead of accommodating behavior that made me uncomfortable. We talked about specific examples from past relationships, where I'd ignored red flags or made excuses for concerning actions. She gave me homework to practice stating my needs directly in low-stakes situations like with friends or coworkers, building up my comfort with being clear about boundaries. The work felt productive in a way the earlier grief processing hadn't, like I was actually building new skills instead of just surviving the fallout. One afternoon, I checked my mail and found a cream-colored envelope with elegant handwriting addressed to me. Inside was a wedding invitation from Megan and Tom with a personal note card tucked in. Megan had written that they would love for me to come celebrate with them, that I was part of their story now even though we'd met under such weird circumstances. She said having me there would mean a lot to both of them. I held the invitation for a long moment, surprised by how touched I felt. I texted Megan right away saying I would definitely be there and asking if I could bring a +1. She responded within minutes with 3 exclamation points and said of course I could bring someone. I marked the wedding date on my calendar and started thinking about what to wear. The following weekend, I decided to host my first dinner party in the new apartment. I invited 6 friends, including Valerie and her boyfriend, made lasagna and salad, and set my little dining table with the nice dishes I'd bought at a home goods store. Everyone showed up with wine or dessert, and we spent 3 hours eating and talking and laughing about nothing in particular. Valerie's boyfriend told a story about a disastrous camping trip that had everyone crying with laughter. My coworker brought her new puppy who fell asleep under the table. Someone else suggested we make this a monthly thing. As I looked around at everyone relaxed and happy in my space, multiple people commented on how settled and content I seemed lately. I realized they were right. I genuinely felt good about my life in a way I hadn't in years, not just since Jason, but even before him. 6 weeks into seeing the guy from Valerie's boyfriend's gym, he asked if I wanted to make things more official instead of just casually dating. We were walking through a park after getting lunch, and he said he really liked spending time with me and wanted to know if I felt the same way. I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. He'd been consistently respectful and communicative about everything, never pushing when I said I needed space, always following through on plans he made. The relationship felt easy and natural in a way I'd forgotten was possible. He smiled and took my hand, and we kept walking through the park talking about what being official meant to both of us. Megan and Tom's wedding was beautiful. I brought my new boyfriend, who looked great in his suit and made easy conversation with everyone at our table. The ceremony was outdoors at a vineyard with string lights and flowers everywhere. Megan wore a simple, elegant dress and cried happy tears during her vows. At the reception, she found me during cocktail hour and hugged me, so tight I could barely breathe. She thanked me again for being brave enough to confront Jason, saying it gave her real closure knowing he couldn't trap anyone else the same way. She said she used to worry about him finding another woman to manipulate, but now she felt like that chapter was truly finished. Tom joined us and shook my boyfriend's hand, thanking him for coming to celebrate with them. We danced and ate cake and took photos, and the whole night felt like a celebration of everyone moving forward into healthier futures. 4 months after leaving Jason, I was walking to work one morning when I realized something had shifted. I'd completely stopped checking over my shoulder or scanning crowds for his face. I wasn't worried about running into him at the grocery store or the coffee shop or anywhere else in the city. The constant low-level anxiety I'd been carrying around had finally lifted without me even noticing it disappear. I'd been so used to that hypervigilance that I hadn't realized how exhausting it was until it was gone. My shoulders felt lighter, my breathing came easier, and I could just exist in public spaces without that background hum of worry. My new relationship continued being healthy and straightforward in ways I was learning to appreciate more each day. We communicated clearly about our schedules and needs instead of playing guessing games. We respected each other's space and time with friends instead of being clingy or jealous. There were no hidden boxes in his apartment, no secret shrines to ex-girlfriends, no elaborate deceptions about who I was in his life. Normal felt absolutely revolutionary after living through Jason's manipulation. Simple things like my boyfriend saying he'd call and then actually calling at that time, or telling me directly when something bothered him instead of being passive-aggressive, felt like relationship miracles. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some hidden problem to emerge, but months kept passing and everything stayed consistently healthy. One evening, Valerie and I were having our Monday dinner at my place, and we got talking about how the whole Jason situation had actually brought us closer as friends. She said watching me handle everything with such strength had inspired her to set better boundaries in her own life. She'd stopped accommodating her mom's guilt trips about not visiting enough, and she'd told a coworker to stop dumping all his work on her desk. I laughed and said I hadn't felt particularly strong during most of it, just desperate to get out. But she insisted that strength wasn't always feeling confident. Sometimes it was just doing the hard thing anyway when you were scared. We clinked our wine glasses together, and she said she was really proud of how far I'd come in just a few months.